Welcome to Forbes Movies. Joining me now is Scott Mendelson, a Forbes entertainment analyst and box office pundit. Scott, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Great. So let's kick things off. What's new at the box office this weekend?
Not much. It's sort of the next 2 weeks are basically calm before the storm because nobody wants to get in the way of Black Panther Wakanda Forever, which opens on November 11th. This weekend, we have two award season films. Tar, which I did see. It's been a limited release. I did see it on Monday. It's an acting spectacular. Kate Blanchett is terrific in it. It's also a 2.5 hour art house picture, so I don't necessarily think it's super commercial, but that's fine.
Can you give us a little
Um,
summary of Tar?
it is about an accomplished and renowned conductor who basically has to fend off professional and personal challenges to a reputation when certain potential scandals come to light. Um, I mean, if I want to be simplistic, it's about cancel culture, but it's a little more complicated than that.
Got it.
And that's, I don't want to pigeonhole it in that sense. Uh, but yes, it's a pretty darn good movie. I have not seen Till yet. That opens wide tomorrow. That stars Danielle Deadweiler, I hope I pronounced that correctly, as the mother of Emmett Till, whose murder, of course, was one of the events that helped push along what would eventually be the civil rights movement in the 1960s. His murder, of course, was in 1955. And the film charts her struggle to get some variation of justice for her murdered child. She personally has been getting rave reviews for her performance. She's probably going to be in the conversation for Oscar nominations. Whether the rest of the film does or not is an open question. But the film itself has been getting excellent reviews too. Honestly, one reason I've been holding off is because it's the kind of thing I might be able to convince one of my kids to go to with me, while I wouldn't be caught dead dragging them to tar. So I have to pick and choose my battles. Um, the only new wide release this weekend is from Lionsgate. It's a religious themed horror movie called Pray for the Devil, starring Jacqueline Bayers as the quote unquote first female exorcist. I don't believe it's based on a true story. Um, but it might be, sometimes they advertise these religious horror films as being based on actual events because, Satan is real and all. Um, Nobody's expecting the film to break out all that much. I feel like I've been seeing trailers for it for 2, 3 years. I don't know if it was a COVID casualty um, in terms of its production. I think it was because I mean the film was announced in October 2019, so it was supposed to be shot in spring 2020, et cetera, et cetera. Um, it's interesting to the extent that it was delayed because of COVID. It opens in theaters this weekend, and then there's a Blumhouse picture called "Run, Sweetheart, Run," which is about a young woman who goes on a dinner date that turns very badly for her. That film was supposed to be theatrical in early 2020, ended up going to Amazon. So you really have what I think are the last two COVID delayed films to finally be released in one form or another this weekend, for what that's worth.
So, how do you think
Um,
that they'll stack up to the other horror movies of the 2022 Halloween season?
well, I mean, if it opens to $7 million, that's on par with The Invitation, which was considered almost decent in August of this year. It did eventually leg out to around 30 something worldwide on a $10 million budget. It's a very good movie, by the way. If you haven't seen it, I would suggest you fork over your VOD rental money because it's a solid picture. It's very, very loosely based on Dracula in what I like to call a rip-off, don't remake kind of way, in that it's loosely has some IP revolved around it, but it's doing its own thing in a way that I very much enjoyed. But no, I don't think it's going to open on par with, Halloween Ends or Smile or even Barbarian, which opened to $10 million and legged out to 40 domestic before debuting on HBO Max earlier this week. Um, and I think it's the last Lionsgate movie from this year because I think the Wonder spinoff got delayed to early 2023, and then of course their biggie is going to be John Wick Chapter 4 in March of 2023.
And you
Um,
always say that it's a good time for a scary movie. Anytime's a good time. But do you think that this is too close to Halloween? Like, could it have made a bigger impact if it was released earlier in October? Because Smile is pretty leggy, and that opened end of September. There were a lot. It was a crowded field this Halloween for scary movies.
Yes and no. If the film turns out to be exceptionally good and buzzy, then you can argue that they made a mistake not releasing it with more time left in the spooky season. However, and I don't want to be too dismissive of a film I have not seen, if the film is not that great and is just trying to cram as much Halloween weekend business in before as it can, before it vanishes off the face of the earth, then you release it this weekend. And there are plenty of popular horror franchises, the Halloween, the new Halloween trilogy, the later Saw sequels that were not leggy, even if they were well received. There was a lot of press this weekend over Halloween Ends dropping 80% from its opening weekend, which is a massive drop. It's almost a record for a wide, big deal release. And yeah, Peacock didn't help, the film being available on Peacock concurrently, but neither of the previous two Halloween films, including Halloween, which got good reviews, good buzz, and was not on Peacock, none of those films were terribly leggy. They were all very front-loaded. So the shorter answer to your question is, if Pray for the Devil turns out to be inexplicably good, then yes, they made a mistake not releasing it in early October, late September. But if it turns out to be about as good as we kind of all expect it to be, then they're getting the money where they can.
Got it. I do want to now turn to a movie that was released last week, and that was Black Adam. So even if you haven't seen the movie out there, I'm sure you saw the news that
Detective Chimp.
What?
Detective Chimp is now leading the DCEU. Dwayne Johnson was right. There was a change in the hierarchy of power in the DC universe. And now Condiment King is running the Legion of Doom. Watch out, Super Friends.
Aside from that, Henry Cavill had a mid-credit cameo in Black Adam. Can you elaborate?
That's basically it. He shows up in a mid-credit sequence that was obviously shot in bits and pieces. I don't think they were ever on set together, and that's fine, whatever. That's how movies are made. But it's a very generic, hey, look, it's Superman kind of credit cameo. And Henry Cavill released a video on Monday saying that, yes, this means I'm back. I am going to play Superman again in the the DCEU or DC films or whatever the heck you want to call it today, because it seems to change every other day. Now, does that mean we're going to get a new solo Superman film that's a glorified sequel to Man of Steel? Does that mean he's going to pop up as an added value element in other DC films like we've seen with Mark Ruffalo's Hulk in the MCU? Probably both. I mean, my feelings on the bankability of another Man of Steel movie notwithstanding, I mean, it's not my money. If they want to go for it, go for it. But then we got word, I believe later that day, or was it Tuesday? I don't remember. No, it was Tuesday. I apologize. Where we got word that Peter Safran, who is a longtime producer with Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema, he was one of the producers for many of the Conjuring films, as well as Shazam and Aquaman, which are two of my favorite DC films, by the way, or my two favorite films from the Conjuring universe, because Annabelle is in both of them. He is going to be involved. He's going to be basically the head of DC Studios from the commercial business point of view, while James Gunn, who directed Suicide Squad, which got rave reviews last summer, and who shepherded Peacemaker, which got pretty strong viewership and pretty strong reviews on HBO Max earlier this year, he's going to be sort of the artistic Kevin Feige of the DC studios, as they're calling it now. So the hierarchy of power really did change in the DC universe, just maybe not the way we all thought it would. The short version of my thoughts on this news, it's a perfectly solid pick. I do think it's kind of funny that James Gunn is getting the keys to the castle after making a movie that was a huge box office bomb. A film that I like it. I think it's very good, but even in non-COVID times would have been probably a financial disappointment, because this first Suicide Squad was not terribly well liked, and this was an $180 million R-rated sequel to Suicide Squad that did not have the three biggest elements of that film's predecessor: Will Smith, Batman, and Joker. So the question I'm going to ask, to the extent that it matters, is would James Gunn, the executive, green light the movie that James Gunn, the filmmaker, was allowed to make? And I don't know the answer to that question. Now,
So,
to be
what was
fair,
the response to this news? Because it
almost
seemed like it
overwhelmingly
shook
positive.
overwhelmingly positive.
I mean, there are diehard Zack Snyder fans that honestly thought that somehow miraculously he was still going to be welcomed back with open arms, but that was never going to happen. I mean, the world has moved on. The whole, the only reason we got Zack Snyder's Justice League was because we were in a global pandemic, post-production houses were in turmoil, and HBO Max needed new buzzy content. um but that wasn't, that was the end of something, that was the beginning of something. um but other than that, I mean, I think the most important thing right now, and it's no secret, I'm a fan of the films that Walter Hamada made, and I think he got a raw deal in terms of the perception of his performance. But I think the one thing that Gunn and Safran need, that hopefully they will get, is time. They need several years to do whatever it is they're going to do, uninterrupted and unimpeded by shifting corporate leadership and shifting corporate priorities.
Do you
And if they
think they'll
can
get
get
that
that,
time?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Do you think they will get that time?
I'd like to be optimistic and assume as much.
Okay.
But again, I mean, the circumstances that took place between 2020 and now were unprecedented in modern entertainment history. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just talking about the pandemic. Minor detail that being, um, is in terms of the whole, everything, let's put all our bags in HBO Max, said AT&T, and now Discovery says no, no, no. Let's put our emphasis on theatrical again, and let's not make films and TV shows that are incredibly expensive that will just be on HBO Max. So it was a completely 180-degree turn from A to B, and DC Films kind of got caught in the middle of that. Again, this is not good and evil. This is not right or wrong. I have mixed feelings about both of these strategies. Um, but I think Gunn is a very creative and interesting filmmaker, and he is a filmmaker. So he's going to have, he's not just a number cruncher that wants to boost the quarterly profit margins for shareholders. I think there is value in allowing filmmakers to be executives to a certain extent. The example that I threw out, and I know John Lasseter left under very dishonorable circumstances, and if by some fluke anyone else gets caught under similar circumstances, the open window will be just as wide to throw them out too. That being said, the idea of letting John Lasseter, who had been incredibly successful as a filmmaker at Pixar, just basically run the whole Disney animation department in 2006 was an inspired idea, and commercially and artistically it worked out just fine. Again, I'm not minimizing the allegations of serial sexual harassment that forced Lasseter to go, but that can be separated from the mentality that allowed him to be given the Kings of the Kingdom in the first place.
So now
And
they are co CEOs and co chairs of DC Studios, and this is replacing DC Films. So, can you break down for us what that means? Is that just is this signifying a big change in the direction DC's going, or is this just kind of a name change only?
I think they certainly want to sell it as a huge change. And I can be optimistic and assume that things will either change, or at least they'll be able to make the movies that they want to make without much corporate overreach and or micromanagement. Um, but will that be the case? Will it just be, Gunn and Safran basically doing the kind of things that Hamada was already doing? Varied, DC comics adaptations that are varied in tone and scale and budget and genre, and trying to sell it as something new and different from the old guard? Sure, whatever, and fine. I'm not going to pass moral judgment on that. Um, are they going to try to turn DC into the next Marvel in terms of having this very tight continuity where everything is connected, yada, yada, yada? I don't think so, because for two reasons. A, they've tried that before and it didn't quite work. Second of all, again, before COVID, I think the Hamada strategy was working pretty well. And third of all, I mean, Marvel, the extent to which every Marvel film is explicitly connected and all part of one giant story is somewhat exaggerated by the way the films are marketed and covered in the media. Most Marvel movies are, I would say, 80 to 90% standalone, in that you can walk into Ant-Man without having seen Avengers Age of Ultron and be okay. You can walk into Black Panther without having seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and be okay. There are some Marvel movies that I would consider mythology episodes, like Captain America the Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, maybe Thor Ragnarok, and obviously the Avengers movies, but it's a good bet that anyone that remotely follows Marvel has watched the Avengers movies. So that's a pretty safe place to put your big game changing events. Otherwise, the movies are pretty standalone and user friendly, to the point where if you've seen Thor 1, 2, and 3, you can follow Thor Love and Thunder just fine. And even if you haven't, there's a lot of past tense exposition in Thor Love and Thunder for those that haven't seen Thor Ragnarok, or haven't seen Thor Ragnarok since it was in theaters and maybe didn't take notes. Um, so that being said, I'm hopeful that the next phase of DC Studios, whatever that is, will remember that Kevin Feige's MCU uses the interconnectivity as a seasoning, not as the main course.
So we did see last week Cavill's cameo as Superman. Do you think that would have happened if there wasn't this changing of the guard, or was that happening regardless?
I don't think that would have happened if there wasn't a changing of the guard, because I know Walter Hamada didn't want it. And he was under the opinion, and I don't want to speak for him, and I don't, again, I'm not casting moral judgment either way, is that, he was kind of hired to break away from the Snyder, the Snyder continuity and the Snyder legacy and the Snyder fan base, all due respect. So I think anything that might convince that fan base that they were still at the front of the debate table, I think the Snyder Cut of Justice League did enough damage as is in that sense. Again, I think it's a better film than the theatrical cut of Justice League. In fact, I think it's actually better than most of the comic book movies that came out in 2021. All due respect, other than maybe Shang-Chi, which I quite enjoyed. Um, but I do know that allegedly Dwayne Johnson went behind Walter Hamada's back and got permission from DeLuca and God help me, I don't know who the other person that was brought in to oversee from MGM. Warner Brothers, Luca, and I'm Abby. I'm Abdi. I apologize. DeLuke is a name that rolls off the tongue. Abdi is not. I'll just have to start memorizing that because they are a team. And anyway, so got permission for that. And I think Dwayne Johnson likes Henry Cavill. I think his ex-wife is Henry Cavill's agent. But I do know there's some connection there. I'll have to look that up later. So this wasn't necessarily Dwayne Johnson listening to the fans and giving the fans what they want, although he's smart enough to know that he's playing all sides. He's playing to that fan base. He's playing to those that want DC to be more dominant in the pop culture universe. And he's also playing for, Dwayne Johnson, who wants Black Adam to be one of the top dogs in that continuity. So to a certain extent, he was selling the notion that no, Black Adam is too big to worry about Shazam right now. He wants to go up against Superman, because Superman is, of course, the top banana in the DC world. Now, again, this is not good and evil. I was a little annoyed by that because Shazam was already the star of a well-reviewed and well-liked blockbuster, while Black Adam was not yet. But whatever. This is all marketing and media narrative over a bunch of big budget comic book superhero films.
So if you were to take a guess, who's getting their solo movie and who's going to be the added element, either Black Adam or Superman?
I'm guessing there's more long-term value in. That's a good question, to be honest, and I don't know the answer to that. Because on one hand, I think you get a lot of good PR from greenlighting a Superman movie. The question is, there's still a chance that Superman is more well-known than popular. That he's a character like, relatively speaking, Robin Hood, King Arthur, and Peter Pan. Everybody knows them, but that doesn't mean everybody wants to see a movie about them.
So is Superman a butts and seats superhero?
I don't think he is to the point that everybody among perpetually online thinks he is. I mean, the first Superman was a huge smash in 1978. Superman 2 was a well-liked follow-up to that film in 1981. But we haven't had an unquestionably successful Superman movie in 41 years.
That's a long
Uh,
time.
Superman 3 was disappointing. Superman 4 was a bomb. Supergirl was a bomb. Superman Returns was a huge disappointment in relation to cost. Man of Steel was a disappointment in relation to cost. Batman v Superman made a lot of money, but I got terrible reviews. It was miserably front loaded. It's the most front loaded movie ever to open above $100 million at the domestic box office. So there's a reason why Warner Brothers panicked after that film came out. The choices they made, right or wrong, that's up for debate, but it was certainly understandable that the reception of Batman v Superman would call into question their long-term plans for the DC universe.
So is Henry
Um,
Cavill a beloved Superman? How does he rank in terms of these iconic Supermen?
I think to those who are not among Brittany online, he's an absolutely irrelevant Superman. He's played the role 3 times, not counting, again, as far as I know, he didn't do any research for Zack Snyder's Justice League. So basically, he made Justice League, he made Dawn of Justice, he made Man of Steel. All 3 of those films got mixed to negative reviews. All 3 films were commercial disappointments in one sense or another. Now, the weird skewed change of that is in the last several years, he has been a part of, he was the villain in Mission Impossible 6 and got rave reviews and lots of buzz for that. He's been the star of Netflix's The Witcher, which is a huge smash for Netflix. Um, he is a major supporting role in Enola Holmes, which was a big hit in 2020, and there's a sequel opening next week on Netflix. So we could have a weird skew situation where Henry Cavill is enough of a known entity, has become enough of a known entity since 2015 or 2017, that the idea of him returning to Superman is more of an added value element than it would have been in 2015, 2017, etc.
So is this mixed with the new leadership over at DC reinvigorating the franchise or the brand, the DC brand in general?
Don't know because I think DC was doing just fine before COVID, and I also think that there's a chance that this will just be, a new coat of paint on an old car. Um, and again, there's always it's not like the Warner Brothers Discovery / Warner Brothers DC Studios has anything resembling the benefit of the doubt right now, and for good reason. Um, That being said, there are still a few films left in the pipeline. Aquaman comes out next Christmas. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. The Flash will come out next summer. Um, Wonder Woman 3 is still in some form of development. Um, and, Matt Reeves will be allowed to do whatever the hell he wants with the Batman sequel, which will probably come out in summer 2025, which seems late. But again, when back in the day, a sequel coming out 3 years after its predecessor was normal. Um, so I don't know because I mean I'd like to think, oh, as long as the films were good and as long as they're commercial successes, then they'll be fine. But again, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Shazam, Joker, Birds of Prey, the Batman, the Suicide Squad, they all got either good reviews or strong box office. Wonder Woman 84 is a weird exception because honestly, I think that film would have gotten better reviews had it opened as planned in June 2020 in a non-COVID world. And I certainly think, obviously, it would have done better at the box office had it been released in June 2020 in a non-COVID world. So that one was sort of a sacrifice to the streaming gods. Um, but, it's easy for me to say, oh, if the movies are good and the reviews are good and the box office is good, then everything will be fine. But that's where we were before COVID, and look what happened.
Exactly. So let's say
So
hypothetically
trust but verify.
let's say hypothetically speaking, you're given the keys to the kingdom here, Scott. You are named co-chair and co-CEO of DC Studios. What would you change or do differently?
I mean, I can't undo what was already done, so that's unfortunate. Um, I suppose I would probably give Henry Cavill a new Superman film, but I would budget it in a way that if it made anything close to 400 million, it would be profitable. This could be 500 million, it would be profitable. So you don't have to, it doesn't have to play like an upper tier Marvel or upper tier Fast and Furious or upper tier Mission Impossible movie because it's possible that the audience isn't there. Um, I again, maybe the budget's a little bit lower than last time, but I let Patty Jenkins finish off her Wonder Woman trilogy, just so that relationship maintain, is good. Um, I think you keep Margaret Robbie as Harley Quinn as an added value element in other pictures. I think you keep Dwayne Johnson's Black Adam as an added value element in something like Shazam 3 or some other thing. I don't necessarily think the world needs a Black Adam 2, but I don't think you toss away something as viable as Dwayne Johnson as a marquee superhero in your universe, which is very valuable as an added value element in other movies. Um, as far as what I'd like to see, I mean, you know, and this is obviously ancient history, but what I would have done if I was in charge of planning the movies is I would have made the first Justice League movie a globe-trotting Super Friends versus the Legion of Doom movie, where they have to run around the world stopping a dozen major villains that are all causing chaos at the same time. And then in the second movie, you have Darkseid come to Earth and kick ass and take names. You would have had a first Justice League movie that wasn't a carbon copy of the Avengers, all due respect, or even more so, Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. And then the second film, once the Justice League is established and well liked and popular, then you bring in the forces of Apocalypse. But whatever. If they do a Justice League 2, I would like to see something Legion of Doom related, because that was what the theatrical cut was teasing, unfortunately. And B, that's something that we haven't seen yet. So how do you make a Justice League movie that is something that's different even for people that have grown up with Avengers and Age of Ultron and all that stuff? You make a superhero team versus super villain team on a massive scale, and that would be different and unique and something we haven't seen before.
Well, you've heard it here first. Scott Mendelson, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure.